With his Hamburg hats, three-piece suits, and his lion tail fly whisk, Dr. Hastings Kamuzu Banda, the life president of Malawi, was one of the oddest dictators in African history. During his 33-year rule, the country experienced the worst human rights violation and paternalistic control of Malawians. He controlled every aspect of their lives, treating his people as children and addressing his ministers as my boys. He banned televisions, beards, dreadlocks, and long hair among men. Banda is remembered on the continent as the only president who maintained ties with apartheid South Africa and Portuguese regimes. He backed Nixon in Vietnam and refused to support an armed struggle against the Ian Smith regime in Southern Rhodesia. This is the rise and fall of Dr. Hastings Kamuzu Banda. In 1953, white settlers in Northern Rhodesia, Southern Rhodesia, and Nyasaland created the Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland. Since the 1920s, settlers in both Rhodesia had sought a union to counter the overwhelming numerical superiority of black Africans. However, the British Colonial Office initially rejected the plan for fear of an African opposition backlash. In 1948, they persuaded the imperial government to support the federation based on economic arguments. Blacks in Northern Rhodesia and Nyasaland immediately rose up and opposed the federation, fearing Southern Rhodesia would dominate it. On the 6th of July 1958, Dr. Hastings Kamuzu Banda touched down at Chireka Airport, returning to Nyasaland after an absence of over 40 years. His return followed a request from the leaders of Nyasaland African Congress to come and lead the struggle against the federation. They included Henry Chipembere, Kanyama Chiume, and Dunduzu Chisiza. On arrival, they appointed him the President General of the Congress and immediately embarked on a nationwide public rallies to drum up support for the party. By the end of the year, many Malawians had rallied behind the party, mainly because of the charismatic leadership and oratory skills of the new man in charge. From that time onwards, Dr. Banda became one of the colonial government's most troublesome nemesis and critic, especially with his fiery call for the breakup of the Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland. According to the best guess, Hastings Kamuzu Banda was born between March and April in 1898 in a small village near Kasungu in central Nyasaland. His name Kamuzu, meaning little root, was given to him because he was conceived after a medicine man had given his mother root herbs to cure her infertility. At age 7, he attended a missionary school where he was baptized into the Church of Scotland and took the name of a Scottish missionary, John Hastings. At 16, he set out on a lonely barefoot journey to South Africa in search of higher education and work. He was admitted to a Methodist church-run school in Johannesburg. To finance his education, he worked so hard as a miner and did menial jobs, living cheaply in shanty towns. A turning point in his life came about in 1924, when he won a scholarship to the Wilberforce Academy in America. From this point, Banda gradually accumulated degrees, a bachelor's in philosophy from the University of Chicago, a doctorate in philosophy from Meharry Medical College in Tennessee. To practice medicine in the territories of the British Empire, which included Nyasaland, he sailed to Scotland in 1937 and attained medical qualifications from the universities of Edinburgh and Glasgow. He was subsequently awarded a Scottish Triple Conjoint Diploma in 1941. For 17 years, he worked in Britain as a general practitioner. He was meticulous and diligent as a doctor, renowned for his acts of kindness towards patients. He was said to be particularly good with children. In 1941, he set up his own practice in a poor area of Liverpool, waiving fees for poor patients and even paying rents for some of the poorest. From Liverpool, he moved to Harlesden in North London, where he bought his own house. In London, he became seriously involved in anti-colonial politics, meeting fellow activists like Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana and Jomo Kenyatta of Kenya. He became the Nyasaland African Congress Party's man in London, a liaison between the party and the British Colonial Office, which was planning to bring together its 3 Central African colonies in a federation. In the position, the Congress leaders invited him back home to come and take over the leadership of the party, which he turned down, citing personal issues he had to take care of first. At the time, his secretary, Marine French, had become pregnant with his child, and her husband sued for divorce. When the affair was about to be made public, Banda fled from Britain to Ghana. Miss French followed him, but he rejected her and he never supported their child. While in Ghana, allegations of illegal abortions led to his suspension from the medical register. Out of work, he returned home to lead the struggle for independence. Returning in triumph, he sought an interpreter since he could not speak his native Chichewa language. His speeches and resistance to imperialism among the Malawians became increasingly common. By February 1959, the situation had become serious enough that the Rhodesian troops were flown in to help keep order. A state of emergency was declared and Nyasaland African National Congress banned. On the 3rd of March, Banda, along with hundreds of other Malawians, were arrested and imprisoned in Gwero, Southern Rhodesia, during Operation Sunrise. Well, since this was the decolonization period in Africa, pressure mounted on the British to release the prisoners. In April 1960, Banda was released from prison and invited to London for talks aiming at bringing about independence. In August 1961, elections were held and he became the Prime Minister of Nyasaland under the Malawi Congress Party MCP, which replaced Nyasaland African Congress. The following year, the British Secretary of State for African Affairs agreed to end the Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland. On the 6th of July 1964, exactly 6 years after Banda's return to the country, Nyasaland gained independence, and Banda himself renamed it Malawi. He added the name Ngwazi to his name, meaning the conqueror. From the onset, Banda was not a man who was ready to live side by side with those who had opposing views in the new independent Malawi. Barely a month after independence, Malawi suffered a cabinet crisis in September 1964. The crisis came about as a result of disagreements between Banda and his cabinet ministers over domestic and foreign policies. Disagreements over the country's foreign policies hinged on Banda's insistence that Malawi should have friendly ties with apartheid South Africa and Portugal, which had not yet granted independence to neighboring Mozambique. Domestically, they also disagreed on the detention bill, which Banda had adopted from Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah. The bill was aimed at detaining political opponents without declaring the state of emergency. Most of the cabinet ministers felt that the bill threatened the liberty of everyone, including themselves. An overarching issue was Dr. Banda's personality and governance of using divide and rule tactics on his cabinet, and also calling them boys in public. Sensing dictatorial tendencies, the ministers sought to limit the powers of the president. To Banda, this was absolutely unacceptable since he had ambitions of becoming a life president in future. Another significant step was Dr. Banda's intention to bring in a detention without trial bill, a matter on which one of the cabinet members, Colin Cameron, a lawyer, resigned. In reaction to these disagreements, Dr. Banda dismissed the 3 cabinet ministers, namely Otton Chira, Augustine Bwanausi, and Kanyama Chiume. In sympathy with their colleagues, Willie Chokana, Yatuta Chisiza, and Henry M. Chipembele and John Solthi resigned. All the former cabinet ministers were later Christ-turned rebels, with Kanyama Chiume designated as Kamuzu's enemy number 1. He was quoted saying, "These people are wild animals. They must be destroyed, no beating around the bush. Arrest them, but if they resist arrest, well, anything you do is all right as far as I'm concerned." With the dismissals, he ran Malawi as his personal fiefdom, demanding not just obedience, but civility. He held several ministerial portfolios which included Minister of External Affairs, Defense, Agriculture, Justice, Works and Supplies, Women's and Children's Affairs, and Minister of Community Services. In 1966, he consolidated power and declared Malawi a one-party state under the Malawi Congress Party, MCP. For the next 27 years, the government and the MCP were effectively one. All adult citizens were required to be party members. They had to carry party cards in their wallets at all times. The cards were often sold by Banda's Malawi young pioneers, his private militia, who even sold them to unborn children when their mothers were expectant. The MYP was established in 1963 to terrorize political opponents with the help of the Special Branch, a unit within the police. They were more or less adequately trained militarily, but heavily armed and thoroughly indoctrinated in the fashion of Kamuzuism. Most of the MYPs were recruited to work in government departments as agents and informers. In Malawi, Banda's grip extended to moral standards under which the population was required to live. No other African leader imposed his personality with such vigor and force on the country he ruled. He insisted on directing even the smallest of details of Malawi's affairs. He said, "Everything is my business, everything. The state of education, the state of our economy, the state of our agriculture, the state of our transport, everything is my business. Anything I say is law, literally law. It is a fact in this country." The strict Puritan code, which he so much admired, became the nation's way of life. The Decency in Dress Act prohibited women from wearing miniskirts or trousers or any cloth that had a visible cleavage. The only exception to this was at vacation resorts and country clubs, where they could not be seen by the general public. Banda explained that these restrictions were not designed to oppress women, but to instill respect and dignity for them. Men were not an exception in Banda's Malawi. It was a crime to have long hair or beards. Foreign visitors were subjected to shearing by the airport barber or went home. Any man who ventured into the public with long hair could also be seized by the police and subjected to an involuntary haircut. By 1970s, prospective visitors to the country were informed of the following requirement for obtaining visas. Female passengers will not be permitted to enter the country if wearing short dresses or trouser suits, except in transit or at lake holiday resorts or national parks. Skirts and dresses must cover the knees to conform with the government regulations. The entry of hippies and men with long hair and flared trousers is forbidden. Films, foreign newspapers, magazines, and books were strictly censored to prevent decadent Western influences from harming the population. It was the role of the Malawi Censorship Board to view and edit films before they would be released to the public. Once edited, a sticker was given stating that it was now suitable for viewing and sent back to the owner. Items to be sold in bookshops were also edited. Pages or parts of pages were cut out of magazines like the Newsweek and the Time. Communist literature, electric magazines, and Lonely Planet's Africa on a shoestring were banned. Knowledge of pre-Banda's history was discouraged, and many books on these subjects were banned. The mass media, a single radio station, a single daily newspaper, and a single weekly newspaper were tightly controlled, and they mainly served as outlets for the government's propaganda. Televisions were banned, although Banda owned one with a satellite that he used to watch Western programs. In an issue of the Malawi News, a newspaper owned by Dr. Banda's Malawi Congress Party, a commentator was said that if most Malawians, the rural poor, were asked if they wanted a television in their homes, they would probably reply, "What does it taste like?" Banda was the subject of an extensive cult of personality. In Malawi, it was required for every business building to have an official picture of him hanging on the wall, and no poster or clock or picture would be higher than his portrait. Before every film, a video of Banda waving to the people was shown while the anthem played. He also made his birthday a public holiday. When Banda visited a city, a contingent of women were expected to greet him at the airport and dance for him. A special cloth bearing the president's picture was the required attire for these performances. Houses of worship required government approval to operate. In October 1967, Jehovah's Witnesses were banned entirely when they chose neutrality in Malawi's politics. To make matters worse, they refused to buy the MCP cards, attracting Banda's wrath on the sect, where torture and confiscation of properties took place. Like most dictators across Africa, in 1971, Banda declared himself president for life of Malawi. So his extended title read, His Excellency, the life president, Dr. Hastings Kamuzu Banda, the Ngwazi, meaning conqueror. This is how official organs in Malawi had to refer to him. With this, his dictatorship degenerated into absolute tyranny. He snuffed out any sign of dissent, incarcerating thousands of Malawians in detention centers and sending out his secret police and paramilitary young pioneers to deal with opponents at home and abroad. One of the most shocking cases of his era was the death of 4 MCP politicians, comprising 3 cabinet ministers, including Dick Matenje, Tribe Sangala, Aaron Gadama, and 1 member of parliament, David Chiwanga, which took place in Mwanza district in May 1983. Revelations surrounding the alleged assassinations indicate that Dr. Banda had intended to spend a period abroad, which set off a constitutional crisis as to who would act on his behalf since he did not have a deputy. A faction led by Mama Cecilia Kadzamira, Banda's official hostess and the First Lady, wanted John Tembo, Kadzamira's uncle, to be the caretaker president. The murdered politicians challenged the move, leading to their subsequent assassinations in Mwanza. The 4 were arrested while they left parliament and clobbered to death by the police with sledgehammers. They were officially described as having died in a car accident. The long arm of Banda's regime also caught up with the dissidents in exile. In 1979, Dr. Atati Mpakati, the leader of the opposition movement Socialist League of Malawi, survived a later bomb attack, crippling both his hands in Maputo, Mozambique. Banda admitted that he had ordered the attack. In March 1983, another bomb was sent to his home, Zimbabwe. This time, he did not survive. Oton Chira of Malawi Freedom Movement led another opposition movement that faced a similar fate with headquarters in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. While on a visit to his supporters in Zambia in the company of his wife Vera and son Fumbani, the 2 elders were arrested and sentenced to death. But due to international pressure, their sentences were commuted to life imprisonment in 1984. In October 1992, only a few weeks after being visited by British lawyers, Oton Chira died in controversial circumstances at Zomba Central Prison. According to the lawyers, he was partially deaf and blind due to untreated cataracts. In October 1989, a leading Mafremo member and journalist, Kwapatila Mhango, was killed in a bomb blast at his Lusaka home, for which Banda's Secret Service was also held responsible. 10 people died, including Mhango's 2 wives and young children. In the words of a great Malawian poet, Jack Mapenje, he said, "Banda built more prisons than hospitals," which is ironic for a medical doctor. The hardcore program, as it was popularly known, was introduced in about 1982. Persistent criminals, also known as the hardcore, were taken to Nsanje prison or Zeleka prison on completion of their sentences. While there, they were stripped naked, chained to the floor of their cells and either denied food or, according to some accounts, given 1/4 rations. Many were reported to have died as a result. While in power, he was careful not to appear radical in front of the former colonial masters. He pleased the British government by maintaining trade and contact with South Africa, established diplomatic relations with it, including a trade treaty that angered other African leaders. He condemned his fellow African leaders more than he did apartheid. He went as far as paying a state visit to South Africa, who in return gave him a soft loan of 300 million rand, which he used to build the capital Lilongwe, and built him a palace as well. In return, he was expected to support South Africa's apartheid policies among fellow African leaders. When they threatened to expel Malawi from the Organization of African Unity, he responded by accusing them of hypocrisy, and further alleging that African leaders practiced disunity, not unity, while posing as liberators of Africa. While they play in the orchestra of Pan-Africanism, their own drums are burning, he said. He refused to establish diplomatic relations with communist countries and supported the US in the Vietnam War. In return, he received a lot of financial aid from the US. In 1988, he received $18 million in assistance, and a year later, he received $341 million despite the gross human rights abuses, murders, and extrajudicial killings. By 1988, Banda was already 90 years old. To maintain his grip on power, he entirely relied on mainly two people. One was his constant companion for 30 years, Cecilia Kadzamira, a former nurse he had employed in his surgery before independence, then became his secretary, then progressed to the position of official hostess, and finally acquired the title of Mama. She would later be addressed as Mother of the Nation. When Cecilia and Banda were going through a difficult time, Banda banned the song Cecilia by Simon and Garfunkel because of its lyrics that hit so close home, such as, "Cecilia, I'm down on my knees, I'm begging you please to come home." The other was Kadzamira's uncle, John Tembo, Banda's chief hatchet man who was ruthless in eliminating rivals. Between them, they controlled access to the president and intended to inherit power on his demise. Despite his old age and growing sickness, Banda showed no signs of being ready to relinquish power. As he would later say, quote, "I want to be blunt. As long as I'm here and you say I must be your president, you have to do what I want, what I like, and not what you like and want. Kamuzu is in charge. That is my way." However, the downfall of Banda began in March 1992 when a pastoral letter drafted by 8 Catholic bishops denounced Banda's regime. It was read in all churches across Malawi. The letter amounted to a scathing indictment of poverty, corruption, inequality, censorship, and political repression that were commonplace in Malawi. It spoke of the failing standards and overcrowding in schools, inadequate health care, lack of freedom, and need for a fair system of justice. The bishops were taken to police headquarters in Blantyre for questioning and then confined to the house of the archbishop for several days. The pastoral letter was later declared seditious, leading to arrests of hundreds of people in its possession. At a meeting on the 11th of March, according to a tape recording of the proceedings that were leaked, party officials agreed to make things easier. We just have to kill these bishops. Other churches, however, spoke out in support of the bishops. The Church of Scotland, of which Banda himself was an elder, called on its members to pray for this profoundly lonely man who is locked in the prison house of power. Foreign pressure on Banda also mounted. Leaders and international aid donors no longer had any use for third world anti-communist dictatorships, all of which came under mounting pressure to democratize and open the country up for multipartyism. Donors told Banda he had to implement reforms aimed at making his government transparent and accountable to the people and the international community as a condition for further aid. Disturbed by the mass arrests, police shootings, and Malawi's long record of human rights abuses, donor governments meeting in Paris on the 13th of May 1992 suspended all non-humanitarian aid for 6 months. Forced to concede to multi-party politics, Banda announced in October that a referendum would be held to decide whether Malawi should retain a single-party system, confident that he would win it. At the age of 95, his eyesight failing, he embarked on a draining schedule of campaign meetings to condemn the chaos of multipartyism. He lost the referendum and the country was opened up for multi-party politics. In the 1994 presidential elections, after 30 years in power, Banda was defeated by his former minister, Bakiri Muluzi, a Muslim businessman. To his credit, Banda never held on power, as he accepted defeat gracefully and acknowledged Muluzi the clear winner. He also promised that his opposition party would contribute to the building of a better and a democratic Malawi. Among his other achievements, he built and founded Kamuzu Academy, a school modeled on Eton, at which expatriate teachers taught Malawian children Latin and Greek. However, at the Eton of Africa, children were disciplined if they were caught speaking Chichewa, the local language. After his defeat in 1994, the following year, he was tried for the 1983 murder of 3 cabinet ministers and a member of parliament who were beaten to death with crowbars and hammers by the police. He was excused from the court because of sickness and was ultimately acquitted. In his life after presidency, Banda remained quite unrepentant in his opinion of Malawians, calling them children in politics, and saying they would miss his iron-fisted rule. On the 25th of November 1997, Banda died at Garden City Clinic in Johannesburg, South Africa, aged 99. Present was the ever-royal Cecilia Kadzamira. At the time of his death, Banda amassed a lot of wealth, estimated to be worth $445 million in cash and several million more in fixed and disposable assets. In one of the world's poorest and smallest nations, where per capita income was $200 a year, Banda kept 5 residences, a fleet of British luxury cars, plenty of offshore accounts, and a private jet. Having left no known heir, a battle ensued between Cecilia Kadzamira and Banda's family over his wealth, and this would be a story for another time. A friend who saw Kamuzu Banda in his last illnesses said that when he parted from him, the old man wept and said, "I'm so lonely, so lonely." We shall end this episode with a quote from one of Banda's speeches to the Malawian parliament that resonates with Africa today. He said, "This is the trouble in Africa today. Too many ignorant people who don't know anything about history. And if they do know anything about it, they do not know how to interpret and apply it. That is why Africa is a mess. That is the tragedy of Africa. Too many ignorant people are in positions of power and responsibility," said a man who killed thousands and jailed hundreds of thousands of people.